Hello, KU fans. Welcome to November, and welcome to another episode of KU Sports Extra here at KUsports.com. Tom, 10 episodes in right now. Did you ever think we would make it 10 episodes?
I mean, My Mother the Car made it for a couple of years, and that was such a horrible show.
Right.
So I'd like to think that we can figure out how to get this going and last even longer than My Mother the Car.
Yeah, well, so far we're on pace. I'm glad we're there. And hey, it's been a great 10. I've really enjoyed it.
I wouldn't say that. No, that's
I would.
No, what are you, Charlie Weiss, over-promising? Come on.
All right.
Be a better self-scout than that.
Well, that's fair. Let's talk about episode 10 then. Let's just get into it instead of talking about it, even though I just said let's talk about it. I like to talk. Have you guys noticed? Have you noticed? Okay, you have. Good news, Tom, this week. It is Overlap City right now, finally. It is Overlap City. Basketball, even though it's just an exhibition game, has started. Football is in a very, very winnable week. That's good news.
Tell me something I don't know.
I think that Kansas has a chance to beat Iowa State on the football field.
There was a fly. I got it.
Yeah, Miyagi over here. I think that's good news, that Kansas has a chance to win a football game after what we saw at Baylor. The other good news is Bill Self and his incredibly deep and talented basketball team were out there at Allen Fieldhouse playing in front of a live studio audience. I mean, these guys are really talented, and this really feels like the heart of the season, of KUsports.com season. So,
it sure does, but the bad news is if they play like they did against the Baylor Bears, they're not going to beat the cast and crew from My Mother the Car.
Now, son, take it easy. You'll probably go through the roof when you hear this, but this is your mother talking. David, I've come back.
Oh! It was
show.
a terrible performance in terms of the basics and snapping the ball or catching the snap, whichever that was. A number of things just terrible after 2 weeks. Maybe, sometimes the 2 weeks helps, sometimes it hurts. Bad performance. And you can't have a bad performance against a great team like Baylor. But even if you have a bad performance against Iowa State, you're going to get pounded.
Sure.
So
if you're Kansas, you can't have bad, period.
You can't.
And that includes...
There's no depth.
Right.
There's no offensive line.
Yeah.
There's no margin for error. And the bad news is it's got to be the same offensive linemen who are getting flagged, who are going to go back out there because there just isn't any depth.
Right. It's got to be from within. They've got to just decide, I'm not going to make mistakes today, and then do it. But
right.
Much easier said right here than it is out there, certainly. Well, let's move on to basketball and talk Lost in Translation this week and get our first Bill Self edition of Lost in Translation.
Looking at the first half, we were pretty active. I don't know if we can defend the block because they didn't throw it inside very often. And you got to be able to finish your possessions and be a good rebounding team, which remains to be seen. But I think there's some things that's good about our guys that could eventually be a very good defensive team.
Translation, the first half was unbelievable. Let's not talk about the first half. We don't want them getting complacent. The whole point of these press conferences is to let the players know what they just did isn't good enough. We don't want them getting complacent. So let's talk about the lazy second half. The blasé second half. 13 points given up in the first half. No, let's not talk about that. Kill complacency. Curiosity killed the cat. Complacency killed the dog.
And My Mother the Car was killed by...
a crosswalk.
Fair enough. All right. Speaking of streets and crosswalks, let's move on to Breakdown Street and talk about KU Iowa State. A big game for Clint Bowen, a big game for Kansas, a big game for Kansas fans. No question about it, right?
Yeah, it is a big game, and I would hope that fans look at it that way and show up in droves. Because this is your chance to support the interim head coach who didn't have to take this assignment that was a daunting task, that had, on paper, a much better chance of hurting his career resume than helping it.
Yeah, definitely.
He did it for your university. Now be there for him.
Good call. That would be cool to see. I think it's going to be a cool game to see, too. I think these are similar football teams, similar styles. They're both at the bottom of the Big 12 standings, and when you're at the bottom of the standings, you have to play a certain way. You have to play with toughness. You have to execute. You have to be fundamentally sound. That's what Mark Mangino's teams were here. Clint Bowen was a part of those teams. That's what Clint Bowen is trying to get his teams to be. And let's be honest, Mark Mangino's on the staff at Iowa State, so you know those guys are going to be buttoned up and tightened
Well,
up.
and Paul Rhodes has button-up teams. He doesn't have good talent. This will be the first time in the Big 12 that Kansas isn't overmatched talent-wise.
Sure.
Now, they're overmatched in terms of having years of being coached properly.
Right.
Kansas hasn't had that, and Bowen's trying to get years of work done in 9 weeks, and it's a tough task.
You can't do it. Yeah, you can't do it. So I think that it'll look a lot like two teams looking in the mirror at each other, and I think mistakes will maybe dictate the outcome. Whichever team makes fewer mistakes and doesn't have to worry about giving things away.
Sam Richardson hasn't made many of those. He's only thrown 6 picks.
No, he's a talented quarterback, and Bowen talked about the improvement he's made from that breakthrough performance on that night game. Senior night a couple of years ago when no one had heard of him. The KU coaching staff hadn't even prepared for him.
He was a true freshman, wasn't he?
He was nowhere to be found on the roster, on the depth chart. They didn't have any idea that he could play, and he played like a bandit.
And then he kind of had some
he's been
bad
up and down
performances,
since then.
and now he's kind of had a steady upcline this
Pretty
year.
solid performance
Upcline?
so far this year. Upcline is a good word.
Incline
Yeah.
or upward climb, but I'm not sure about upcline.
For a guy catching imaginary flies, that's a perfectly fine word. Let's move on to prediction time and find out what you think is going to happen in the outcome. What do you have this week, Tom?
Well, I think the smartest way to do predictions is to throw out last week. Whenever you can do that, whenever you can find a way to do that, because emotionally you always put too much emphasis on last week. Last week they were terrible against a great team. The 3 previous weeks, they showed some real signs of being a much better team than they were under Charlie Weiss. So I'm going to pick an upset this week and go with Kansas winning in an upset against Iowa State. And it is an upset because Iowa State's 4-point favorite.
They are favored. That's right. I'm with you. I'm picking KU. I think the return home helps. I think the Baylor loss hurt Clint Bowen, I think, a lot. I mean, I don't think he, because they had played so well in those 3 games before that, I think he had thought they might have turned a little bit of a corner and then, bam, smacked in the face by a very, very good team. So I think it hurt him, but I don't think it hurt the players as much. They know that's a good team, and they know that this is a chance. They know they have a shot to win this game. So I think these guys are ready to go, and will come out and play inspired football. Guys like Ben Heaney, Jameis Mundine, Ja'Cory Shepard, there's a long list there. They deserve for something better than Central Michigan to be their last victory, and I think they have it in them. So I've got KU 23, Iowa State 20, and I think it's going to be a heck of a game.
Very similar to the one I picked, 24-21.
There you go. Yeah, 3 points. A field goal could decide it. That might be
it's
going
to
be
a last-second field goal here by Matthew Wyman. Remember, Scott Webb had a last-second field goal to beat Iowa State years ago, and the reason I'm picking Wyman to do this is because he's always wanted to be famous. And then he was famous for 15 minutes. Now, that wasn't enough, but it did whet his appetite for fame.
Right.
So he's going to get famous here with a last-second field goal.
So when he hit that one against Louisiana Tech, that's like the almost famous version of Matthew Wyman?
Yes, I would say so, which is my second favorite movie of all time,
There you
Almost Famous. And any time, if you read the AP style book, anytime you mention something as being the second best of all time or second favorite, you have to mention first.
There has to be one.
There has to be.
Yeah.
So why just leave the reader, or in this case the audience,
Viewer,
wondering, the viewer?
This is
You don't do
good.
that. Number 1, The Graduate. One word, plastics.
Fair enough. One word here. Primetime pick. That's 2, but who do you have?
That's 3 words, actually, right?
Primetime's one word, right?
No.
I'm looking it up.
I think it's hyphenated, so there'd be 3 words, I think. But
Make your pick.
I digress. As the pseudo-intellectuals like to say, I digress. My pick is Michael Reynolds because if I'm going to pick Iowa State to win, that means that Sam Richardson somehow, some way is going to be contained or forced into mistakes. The person most capable of doing that is Michael Reynolds, the senior in the midst of a very good senior year, and he's going to get to the quarterback and harass him into mistakes.
You did pick Kansas to win. To be
did.
fair, yeah. You just said if I'm going to pick Iowa State, but didn't want to leave any confusion.
I meant to say Kansas.
Yeah, no, I want to
Good
make
at
sure.
it.
Right. We got to make sure. This isn't as good as ABBA, ABABBA, or anything like that.
I'm still not sure we did that in the right order.
It had to be.
I'm
going to go other side of the ball. I'm going to pick a Jayhawk as well, and I'm going to pick Jameis Mundine. I think the guy's had a really good stretch here in his senior year. We've talked about him before. I think this is the game he has a monster game. I think he could have 2, maybe 3 touchdowns, really get in sync with Michael Cummings, have a big-time performance, and if no other reason, then because he wants to outdo E.J. Bibbs, who is a very, very talented tight end on the Iowa State sideline.
And those are the 2 best candidates for all conference.
That's right, and Bibbs was the preseason pick. Mundine, smiled about it because he smiles about everything, but he registered it in the back of his mind and said, hey, I'm going to go get that. So a big game from him would do well for KU, and it would do well for him toward that postseason accolade. So Jameis Mundine is my pick for this week, and you went with Michael Reynolds, who's also in the middle of a really, really good stretch of football. 2
of my favorite guys because you get the chance to watch them develop.
Yeah.
And Jameis Mundine had the drops as a junior, and man, did he come off strong that way, thinking next play.
Right.
He, a weaker man mentally
right.
would have been ruined by that. He's a very strong man in every way, Jameis Mundine.
Very good dude, for sure. Now let's move on to some not-so-good dudes. Most obnoxious. Who do you have this week? Another auto racer, perhaps?
No, not this week. I'm going with a football coach because it's a football coach's job to keep his team under control. And Randy Edsall of Maryland, who's doing a nice job with the Terrapins, failed in that regard.
Absolutely.
In the game against Penn State, the captain's handshake, the role models, didn't shake hands. And which led to a pregame, if you want to call it a brouhaha, a fracas, a row,
scuffle,
a melee, whatever poison noun you want to pick it. But realize that Randy Edsall has to do a better job of upholding football tradition. I mean, the captain's handshake, who's bigger than a tradition that's gone on forever? That's before the game. Nothing's even happened yet.
Right. That's some Miami Hurricanes stuff from the 80s and 90s. 80s probably. I mean, they loved that. Randy Edsall's better than that. I mean, he's got a great reputation.
Did a great job at UConn, doing a good job at Maryland, even without Larry Mazik, who initially was going to go there.
Yeah. I've got a football player in the NFL this week as my most obnoxious player in sports, and it's Greg Little. He's currently a wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, and he's playing on Thursday night against his former team, the Cleveland Browns. Greg Little, who I've had on my fantasy team way more times than I'd care to admit, told his former team, I'm going to make them pay for cutting me. Let me remind you a couple of things, a little perspective, if you will, pardon the pun. He's got 4 receptions for 55 yards all season. He also leads the NFL in drop percentage since 2011. Greg Little, you are not making anybody but yourself pay, and I don't see it happening against your former team. Stop it. That's obnoxious. However, looking at his stats, I'm not surprised he's not letting his play speak for him because
there's no words there. He'd be Marcel Marceau if he were going to let his play speak.
Yeah, it stinks. So, obnoxious dude, obnoxious comment, go Browns.
I think Marcel Marceau's a mime, right?
Was he on the Mother the Car show?
No.
Okay. That's a great show.
Oh, it was so bad.
Speaking of great shows, come back next week to KUsports.com for episode 11, if you can believe it, and if we get there, of KU Sports Extra. For Tom Keegan, Matt Tait, thanks for checking out this episode. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Everybody knows in the second life we all come back sooner or later. As anything from a pussycat to a man-eating alligator. Well, you all may think my story is more fiction than it's fact. But believe it or not, my mother did decided she'd come back as a car.